Hello guys, welcome back to the Quantity Solving Workshop and to another video. In today's video, we're going to be treating how to measure for our blinding, our concrete in our foundation, and the concrete in our column base. So first things first, we'll be looking at the blinding. So the blinding is that mixture of cement, sand, and sometimes aggregates that is used to give a little bit of leveling in order to prevent this settlement for when we place our in-situ concrete work in the foundation. So we have to be measuring for that, and we all know that the unit for blinding is meter cube, meaning volume. So to measure for our blinding, we have to know that the blinding is laid on both the column pit and the foundation trench. So we have to determine the volume of blinding that will be laid on all our column pits. Mind you, we have 5 different column pit types. So we need to know the volume of blinding that will be laid on all those 5 column types, as well as the volume of blinding that will be laid throughout the total length of the trench. So first things first, we need to determine what are the length and breadth of all the column pits, determine their individual numbers, and also determine the thickness of the blinding. So as you can see, written down here are the dimensions of our column base type from 1 to 5 and their frequency. So for column base 1, our dimension is 1.2 by 1.2 and they are 5 in number. Column base 2, 1.2 by 1.2, 11 in number. Column base 3, 1.2 by 2.296 and they are 2 in number. Column base 4, 1.20 by 2.378 and it is 1 in number. And column base 5, 1.4 by 1.4 and they are 3 in number. And what is the thickness of our blinding? The thickness of our blinding is 50 mm. So with this, we can now measure for our blinding to the column pits. So as you know, our blinding is measured in meter cube. So it means that the parameters we need will be the length, the breadth, and the thickness of the column pit. So we're going to be starting with column base 1. The length is 1.2, the width is 1.2, and we know that our thickness is 50 mm. So we'll have to convert that 50 mm to meters. So in meters, that will be 0.05. So with these parameters now, we can now begin our booking. So for column base 1, we can now book 1.20 by 1.20 by 0.05 and then we close. Column base 2 will be okay, then we'll multiply this by the number, which is 5 in number. So for column base 2, 1.20 by 1.20 by 0.05 multiplied by their number, which is 11. So we'll close. For column base 3, we'll do the same thing. 1.20 by 2.296, that's 2.30 by 0.05 and they 2 in number. So you close. And for column base 4, 1.20 by 2.38 by 0.05 and there are how many? 1 in number. So we close. So the last one is column base 5. So column base 5 will be 1.40 by 1.40 by 0.05 and there are how many in number? 3 in number. So close. So after doing all this, now we're not going to be getting the values for column base 1 to 5. So 1.20, so when we do this, 1.20 times 1.20 times 0.05 times 5, this will be 0.36. So we'll do the same thing for column base 2. 1.20 by 1.20 by 0.05 times 11. This is 0.792, which is 0.79. For column base 3, this is 0.276. For column base 4, 0.14. And for column base 5, this is 0.29. So after getting all the values, now what we're now going to be doing now is to add them together. So after adding everything together, what we have is what 1.86. So this is the total volume of blinding for our what column pit. But it doesn't end here. We have to also determine the total volume of blinding for our what trench, and then add it to this value for our what total value of blinding. So to determine the total volume of blinding for our trench, what we are going to be needing is the total length of the trench, the width of the trench, and then the thickness of the blinding. So for our trench, we know that the total length of our trench we calculated in the foundation trench excavation was what 75,958.5. So that would be our total length, 75,958.5. Then what is the width of our what foundation trench? It was given as what 675. And what is the thickness of the blinding? Thickness of the blinding is what 50 mm. So with this now we can now measure for our what blinding for the what foundation trench. So convert everything to meters and then book. So here we're going to be having what 76.00. For the width we're going to be having what 0.68, and then for the thickness we're going to be having what 0.05. So do the maths and we'll know what we have. So 76 times 0.68 times 0.05 is going to give me what 2.58. So this is the total volume of blinding for the what trench. So blinding is one work item that consists of what the blinding to the column pit and the blinding to the what trench. So it is not supposed to be separate. So we have to add the blinding to the column pit and the blinding to the trench together. So we'll not do that, and we're going to be having what 4.44. So this is this for our what blinding. So you can now describe blinding to bottom of column pit and foundation trench. Or you can just say blinding to the bottom of what excavation. So doing this, we've booked for our what blinding. So for our concrete work for both the column pit and to the trench, we are going to be using the same approach. It's just that the difference now is that the thickness of the concrete will change. So we have to determine what is the thickness of the concrete for the column pit and the thickness of the concrete for the what trench. Remember that concrete work is measured in what meter cube, which is what volume. So we're still going to be using the same approach that we've done here for the blinding to calculate the volume of our what concrete work for the foundation. So the next thing we're going to be booking for is our concrete in the what column pit. Now mind you, the concrete in the column pit and the concrete in the trench are measured in such a way that they are different work items. You don't add them together. Why? Because the concrete inside the column pit is not plain in situ concrete. It is what reinforced in situ. concrete because there is going to be reinforcement inside that column pit. However, in the trench, that's in the foundation trench, it is plain in situ concrete because reinforcement is not lined along the trench. So there are different work items. You have to be measuring it separately. So the next thing we're going to be measuring for is the concrete in the column pit. And like I said before, we're going to be using the same approach that we used to measure for our blinding. So instead of following the long rows, we're just going to be measuring as swift as possible. So we already know the dimensions of our column pits from column base 1 to 5. So what we are going to be looking for now is the thickness of our column pits. Now if you look at this drawing of base type 1, you can see that the section through 1 states the thickness of the concrete for the column base, and it is giving us 350. So 350 is the thickness of our concrete for the column pit, and it is the same throughout column base 1 to 5. So since we know the thickness of our concrete now, we can now start booking. So let me just write it here. Thickness is equals to 350 mm. So since we know the thickness as 350 mm, we can now begin our measurements. So column base 1 will now be 1.20 by 1.20 by the thickness, which is 0.35, and there are how many in number? 5. So close. So the next one now is column base 2. So column base 2 will do the same thing, 1.20 by 1.20 by 0.35, and there are how many in number? 11. So now close. For column base 3, we have 1.20 by 2.38 by 0.35, and there are how many in number? 2. So we close. Then column base 4. So column base 4, we have 1.20 by 2.38 by 0.35, and the how many in number? 1. So now close. Then the last one is column base 5, and it is 1.40 by 1.40 by 0.35, and the how many in number? 3. And then we close. So what we'll now do now is we're going to be getting the values for column base 1 to 5. So for column base 1, 1.20 times 1.20 times 0.35 times their number, which is 5, is equal to 2.52. For column base 2, 1.20 times 1.20 times 0.35 times 11 is equal to 5.54. For column base 3, 1.20 times 2.38 times 0.35 times 2 is equal to 1.99, which is approximately 1.999, which is approximately 2.00. So for column base 4, 1.20 times 2.38 times 0.35, and that will be 0.999, which is approximately 1.00. And for the last one, column base 5, 1.40 times 1.40 times 0.35 times 3 is equal to 2.058, which is approximately 2.06. So with this, we've gotten the total values for the volumes of each of the column bases. So what we'll now do now is to add everything together. So after adding everything together, we're going to be having 13.12 meter cube. So this is the total volume of concrete for our what? Column pits. So what we'll now do is now we'll describe by saying what? Reinforced in-situ concrete, let's say 1:2:4, 20 mm aggregate in what? Column pits, and then we'll now what? Close. So doing this, we've what? Measured for our what? Concrete in the what? Column pits. So the next thing we're going to be looking for will be the what? Concrete in the what? Trench. So the next thing we're going to be looking at is how to what? Measure for the concrete in our foundation trench. So we know that concrete is measured in what? Volume. So we're going to be needing 3 parameters. Number 1 will be the total length of the trench, the width of the trench, and the thickness of our what? Concrete footing for the what? Foundation. So we've said that the total length for our what? Trench is what? 75,958.5, and the width of our trench is what? 675. We now need to determine what is the thickness of our trench. So we're going to go and determine the thickness of our trench from the section through the foundation trench. So as you can see this drawing, this is a section through AA in our foundation drawing. As you can see, this is the width of our trench, and it is giving us what? 675. And what is the thickness of the trench? You can see the thickness here is what? 225 mm. So with this now we can now what? Book for our what? Concrete in the foundation trench. So we said our thickness is what? 225 mm. So with this we have gotten the parameters that we need. So all we're going to be doing now is to what? Book. So to book, we have to convert everything to meters. So the length, the total length will be what? 76.00. The width of the foundation will be what? 0.68, and the thickness of the foundation will be what? 0.23. So doing this, we've measured for what? The volume of concrete in our what? Foundation trench. So all we're just going to be doing now is to get the value. So 76 times 0.68 times 0.23 is equal to what? 11.89. So 11.89 is the total volume of what? Concrete for our what? Trench. So we'll now what? Describe plain in-situ concrete in cement, sand, and aggregate 1:2:4, 20 mm aggregates in foundation trench, and then we close. So doing this, we've measured for our what? Concrete in foundation trench. So just a recap, in this video we measured for the blinding for the excavation, the concrete in our column pit, and the concrete in our what? Trench. So with this, we've come to the end of today's video, guys. I hope you derived adequate knowledge from it. Please, if you did, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel, because it helps the channel grow. In our next video, we're going to be treating how to measure for the reinforcement for the column baskets in what? Tons. So stay tuned for that video.